Alright guys, it is El Trader Goof coming back at you with another weekly watch list for this upcoming week. Over the past weekend, we did see what we are currently looking at right now. Ethereum breaking a new 52-week high, right? And the reason why we're here showing you this monthly chart is to sort of show you or what we will sort of expect or be on the lookout for, right? As we can see here, Ethereum, as we were just saying, breaking the new 52-week high, right? Ever since of 2021, right? 2021, we had that high of here, as we're seeing, 4,383,000, right? And with the overnight move that we had gotten last night, right, we can see we hit almost near to that range, right? So we last night we hit a high of 4,334.85, right? So will we see a new all-time high in the markets this upcoming week, right? That's something that a lot of us are questioning ourselves for this upcoming week, right? We saw how SPY rallied up, right, for the past week, right? We can see here. So what we're looking at here on the daily SPY, right? So let's just go ahead, hide all these drawings, right? We can see based off that gap down that we had from the previous week, not last week, but the previous week prior to that, right? We had this gap down, right? Now, with that being said, right, that gap down from that previous week, you can see that Monday was a very strong close. Right now, look at the hourly time frame, right? When we jump into that hourly time frame, we are going to see that based off that Monday's opening, nice little gap up, right? So with that gap up, and despite that big selling that we had the prior week right here, and us getting that gap up last Monday, we can see, excuse me, how last week has just been in a nice strong uptrend, right? So let's go ahead and put back my drawings here, and you guys can see here based off this white line, nice little trend to the upside all last week, right? Now, that being said, last week was a week where you had to find the right price action, be patient, and enough for you to be able to basically ride the trend of the current day, right? Of the day that you were trading. You can see here Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, right? All pretty much strong trend days overall for that intraday trade session, right? We can see based here off this hourly time frame for Monday, ever since we basically opened up, had a nice strong push to the upside and just basically continued that uptrend to the upside the whole entire day, right? Now, rather than coming into Tuesday, you would have expected us to continue to have that push up here on SPY, right? But in that case, we can see here we had some slight trouble breaking above roughly around those 633.12s, and just sort of resisted and had sellers coming for that day and just basically pushed us here lower, right? But as we can see with our trend line drawn up here, right, what do we see based off the after hours for Tuesday? Basically just held that, respected, and just bounced off that, right? Now going into Wednesday, nice little gap up here, but throughout that pre-market session did get filled to the downside, and then respected that right around that 628 area. Once we respected that, bounce off that area, we can see that after that, nice reversal and just nice little strong trend to the upside, right? Same thing going into Thursday, right? We can see Thursday basically almost what we were seeing here is vice versa of each other, right? So we can see here Monday, boom. This is Wednesday, right? So they almost look similar moves, right? Right at open, they have that nice little push up, maintain up, hit nice little area of resistance, and just stay within that after hours, right? Same thing here for Tuesday. Look, Tuesday and Thursday, right? Almost get similar moves that open, hitting slight resistance points, right? When they opened. So almost similar moves, but staying in that upward trend, making those higher highs, higher lows, right? So with that Friday push here, will we be able to see a push higher to go test into those new 52 weeks highs or those new all-time highs that we have here on SPY, right? We can see based off here, 641.44 is going to be that all-time high on SPY, right? So based off our hourly time frame, area that we're going to be looking at to sort of see if we can break above is going to be right around those 639s, right? We can see right around those 639s, area that's been respected in the past, acted as resistance, right? And that's going to be something that we're going to be looking at going here into Monday. Will we see a nice little gap up and push above that, or will we see that pre-market price action just push through it and attempt to hold those 39s, right? Anything's possible. So that's something that we're going to be looking at going into this week with SPY, where we see new all-time high if we do start to break above that 639s here on SPY, guys, right? So that's going to be something that we're going to be looking at for this week, right? So another thing that I'm also going to be looking at is going to be cart, right? Instacart. As we all know, the company that basically you can shop online, right? So you can shop online for your groceries, right? So a couple things that we can see based off our daily time frame, right? What's going to be a couple things we can basically see here. Nice little gap up, right? And now this gap up here was prior to previous earnings, right? So we can see here on the, well, this is the first, and then we had that pre-earning run up, right? So pre-earning run ups created that gap up, but with that gap up here, right, going into that earnings, we can see how this bottom of that wick, right around those 49.49s, 49.50s, right, was an area that going forward was an area that was very well respected, right? So that bottom of the wick is going to be 42.26. Sorry. So as we can see there, bottom of the wick, and then this wick here, 42.38, right? So we can see how that area was respected, held, despite that gap, right? We know most of the times those gaps will act as a magnet, but in this case it didn't act as a magnet, as buyers came in and basically just bought this back up and just continued up here higher, right? Now, as we can see, with that being said, right, as we created that, we create some type of structure there, right? You can see in the past resistance. Now with that gap up, it helps here to sort of create a support right around these areas, right? So right around these 42s, 42.50s, creating some type of support, right? We can see how that held, pushed up higher, breaking above a previous resistance, right? What is going on? There you go. As you can see there, right? So once we broke above that, boom, right? And then we get that pop up, have a nice little retracement, and now we can see how that resistance in the past over here now becoming a support, right? And holding and pushed up higher, right? Then hit it again and again, a new high here, resistance, pushed back down, but it pulls back down right into one of our levels, right? So something that we're looking at this week is going to be this for CART. Will CART see a new all-time high, right? Because with Friday's high and that Friday pop, we can see here based off the weekly time frame, 53.44, right? 53.44 was the previous 52-week high, right? Or as we can say, the all-time high for CART ever since we IPO'd, right? As we can see here. But also looking at the weekly, right, we can see based off the weekly, nice strong uptrend. So going into this week, will we see a new all-time high here on CART, right? So that's going to be something that we're going to be watching here for CART, where we'll be able to see that new all-time high, right? So let's go ahead and dive into that hourly time frame. Now, when we look at the hourly time frame, right, what can we see here? Nice little pop here in the after hours, right, of Thursday, hitting that high of 62.42, right? So we know we have some liquidity to that upside, right? So if we do end up breaking above that 53s, right, which we saw on the daily time frame, is that all-time high, right? That intraday trade session all-time high. Will we sort of have buyers come in once we do break above this to sort of go ahead and grab that liquidity that we have here based off that mornings or the after hour for Thursday's pop, right? We can see. So that's something that we're going to be looking at for CART here going into this week. We definitely want to watch that for CART here, guys. So next one that I will be reviewing here is going to be Hood. Hood, right? Hood is going to be another one. Hood making new all-time highs, new 52-week highs as we speak, right? So with Friday's close, are we going to see a continuation higher, or are we going to see at some point sellers come in and take over, right? Because we have to also remember that we've been having some people selling Hood shares, right? We can see here Cathy Wood buys Airbnb dip worth 21.5 million stock purchase, right? Dumps Plantier, DraftKings, and Robinhood shares, right? With that being said, we also have the Robinhood executive selling 22.5 million in common shares, right? So despite all that, they've been going up high, right? So question is, going into this week, are we going to see a new all-time high, right? Are we going to see that continuation, or are we going to see a pullback / retracement, or just some selling that's needed, right? That's something that we're going to be watching here for Hood. Now, let's go ahead and dive into that hourly time frame, right? Because we look here, we go into the weekly, monthly, we're already in an area where we don't really have much to go about if we go up higher, right? So let's dive into that hourly time frame, right? Now, when we look at the hourly time frame, one thing that we're going to be looking at is this break above this 1587. I would say roughly around that 1590s is what we're going to be looking at to sort of get into calls if given, right? Break above that, we will get into calls to sort of target that Friday high, right? 117, because that's a target that we have a visual representation. It's there. We know it's there. It's a high, right? So we know an area that we want to target. Now, if buyers do come in and they just continue to buy it up, by all means, right? We have an area that at 117 that if buyers do continue to push up higher, our options will just increase more, right? Now, let's say we have sellers come in, right? And sellers push here. Initially, we would want to see a break below this 114 to sort of go ahead and target down into this 113.35. Now, if those 113.35s are broken, what we're going to be looking at is to sort of go ahead and test up into Thursday's high, which is going to be roughly 1260, 1265s in that area here for Hood. Now, last but not least, another thing that we're going to be having an eye out for this week is going to be Google. Now, Google, reason why we're going to be watching here as well, just like any other thing, making almost new all-time highs or attempting to near for a new all-time high, right? As we can see here, look at the monthly, look at the weekly. We can see that 208.21 is current 52-week high, current all-time high, right? Now, let's analyze the Google daily chart, right? When we look at this Google daily chart, what is something that we can see, right? Let's go ahead and take off the drawings and just go about it from there, right? Looking at here, from a previous earnings of this year, right? Nice little gap down going into that earnings, right? So with that being said, right, we know that gaps don't necessarily need to be filled next day, next week, in a month, etc., right? But in this case, from that gap down back in February of this year, that gap has now been filled here on Google with Friday's push to the upside. As you can see, Friday's high was 203.43, right? From the bottom of this gap down here, of this candle, the high or the low of that candle was 203.75, right? So almost having that gap fill to the T, right? Just maybe by a couple, it hasn't fully reached. But in most scenarios here, we would consider that that gap now has been filled if we bring back our drawings, right? So that's something that we're going to be looking at going into this week, you see? Now, let's go ahead and analyze the hourly time frame, right? Because just as we mentioned with Hood, if we do start to break above that 208s here on Google, we don't really know any upside levels to there, right? So, based on our hourly time frame, a couple things that we're looking at is we would love to see us start to break above Friday's high, right? Friday's high of that 203.43s. Even if you want to wait for 203s, 50s, roughly around there to break and continue to have buying pressure to the upside. One thing that we will be targeting is that 208, right? Why are we targeting that 208? Because that is a level that we have visual. We know it's there, and we know that that is all times high, right? So that's why we want to target that area here if we do see buyers start to come in and push above this, right? Now, if let's say sellers want to come in, if sellers do start to break and push this down below those 201 40s, then I would start to look into position short possible puts, right? To sort of target down into Friday's low of day here, right? But that's something that we're going to be looking at for there, right? That's something that I'm going to be looking at for this week. A couple names that I'm looking at. So, that's going to be it for this weekly watch list, and hopefully, you know, these names give you guys some ideas or hopefully make you guys some money here. But remember to always do your own DD and go about it from there, right? So hope you guys have a great week, and let's have a killer week up and coming here, guys. So like, subscribe, and please share, and let's go ahead and get money rolling in, guys. Thank you guys, and Apple community, this is for you guys, and let's go ahead and ask questions. You guys have me there in the Discord, access to me, so feel free to DM me if you guys have any questions regarding some of this. Thank you guys.